The Galactic Council spiraled into panic. All they could beg was, keep Earth out of this. The door sealed before I could move. I heard the lock engage, that deep, mechanical thud that meant the chamber had gone into restricted mode, and I froze against the wall of the observation alcove, stylus still in my hand, notepad still open to a half-finished translation of a catering request. One moment I had been sitting quietly at the side desk, fixing a misprint in the council's dinner menu. The next, the lights had shifted from white to amber, every senior diplomat in the corridor had rushed past the alcove without looking in, and the door had closed behind them with the kind of finality that told you it would not open again for a long time. My name is Yara Osei. I am 26 years old. I hold a junior xenolinguistics certificate, a mid-level security clearance, and at that particular moment, absolutely no business being in that room. But I was there. And what I heard over the next 4 hours changed everything I thought I knew about the galaxy, the species that ran it, and the small blue planet I came from. The Galactic Council chamber is enormous. I had seen it twice before, both times empty, during orientation tours. It holds 12 delegation platforms arranged in a wide circle, each elevated slightly above the central floor, each fitted with translation arrays and environmental controls so that species who breathe different air can sit in the same room without killing each other. The ceiling is made of some kind of clear material that shows the stars outside the station. From the alcove where I sat, pressed against the wall, barely breathing, I could see every delegation platform clearly. They were all occupied. Elder Vrethkon of the Velhari was already standing. That was unusual. The Velhari do not stand during council sessions. They consider it a sign of emotional instability. Vrethkon is about 2 meters tall, gray-skinned, with 4 upper arms that he usually holds folded in a posture that communicates calm authority. Right now, 2 of those arms were raised. The third relay station has gone silent, he said. I knew enough Velhari to catch that without the translation feed. I quietly plugged my earpiece in and pulled up the live translation on my notepad, keeping the screen dim. The delegation from the sewer, small, copper-feathered, usually the calmest voices in any room, were speaking all at once, which they never do. Their translator array was struggling to keep up. What came through in my earpiece was fragmented but clear enough: 17 ships. 40 hours. Nothing left. 17 ships from the combined Outer Rim fleet. 40 hours since they had engaged whatever was out there. And now nothing. Delegate Orin of the Mashari, a species built like a barrel with 6 legs and a voice like grinding stone, slammed something flat and heavy onto his platform. We sent the 3rd fleet because you said the 2nd fleet had failed due to poor formation. We adjusted the formation. We sent more ships. The result was identical. At what point do we accept that this is not a tactical problem? Silence. Not the polite silence of a room waiting for someone to speak. The heavy silence of a room full of people who all know the answer and none of them want to say it out loud. I held my breath. Vrethkon lowered his arms. Slowly. With the kind of deliberate care that looked less like composure and more like a man holding himself together by sheer discipline. The unmade, he said, is not responding to any strategy we have attempted. It does not negotiate. It does not divert. It processes what it encounters and continues. At its current rate of advance, it will reach the inner systems in 14 months. 14 months. I did the math without thinking about it. The inner systems held 60% of all registered galactic population. 14 months was not a countdown. It was a deadline. Delegate Kiru of the Pelathai, a long, pale species with eyes that face sideways, spoke in a voice so quiet my translation feed had to amplify it. Then we discussed the option that has not been discussed. No one responded. Which, in a room full of 12 species who always had something to say, was its own kind of answer. Kiru continued. Earth. The word landed like a stone in still water. I watched the ripple move through every platform in the room. The sewer delegates stopped speaking over each other. Delegate Orin went very still. 2 of the Velhari junior aides exchanged a look that I could only describe as frightened. Vrethkon turned toward Kiru's platform. That option, he said carefully, carries consequences we may not be able to manage. We cannot manage 14 months either, Kiru said. The humans are unpredictable. Vrethkon's voice stayed level but something underneath it was not. They do not assess threats the way we do. They do not weigh options the way we do. When presented with a problem that has been declared unsolvable, they do not archive it. He paused, as if searching for the right word, they take it as an insult. And what they do next is rarely something we can anticipate or contain. I sat very still in my alcove, in the dark, and I thought, he is talking about my species with the same tone my grandmother used when she talked about thunderstorms. Not angry. Not contemptuous. Just wary. The way you speak about something that has its own rules and does not particularly care about yours. Delegate Orin spoke again. The Velhari keep a record. I have heard this. A classified record of every incident involving human contact with galactic affairs. Is that correct? Vrethkon said nothing for a moment. Then, it is. And in that record, Orin pressed, how many times did human involvement make things worse? Another pause. Longer this time. None, Vrethkon said quietly. The room went silent again. A different kind of silence this time. The kind that comes after something true has been said and no one wants to be the first to respond to it. I looked down at my notepad. My hand was steady but my mind was not. I had grown up on Earth. I had studied alien languages because I loved them, because I found them beautiful, because the idea of being a bridge between species seemed like the most meaningful thing a person could do. I had never thought about Earth the way this room thought about Earth. I had never considered that somewhere out there, 12 civilizations, ancient, advanced, experienced, might look at my home planet and feel something close to fear. And I had absolutely no idea why. Delegate Kiru said, very simply, then we must consider it. Vrethkon closed all four of his hands. It was a Velhari gesture I had only seen in textbooks. It meant something like, may what comes next be worth the cost. We will consider it, he said. But we tell them only what they need to know. Nothing more. No one argued. And I sat in the dark alcove, stylus hovering over a half-finished catering translation, and felt the distinct and uncomfortable sensation that my life had just changed direction entirely, and that I had not been asked for my opinion on the matter. I did not sleep that night. The station had been placed on restricted movement protocols, which meant that junior staff like me were confined to our quarters or to the secondary common areas. No one explained why. No one needed to. When a Galactic Council station goes quiet all at once, when the senior diplomats stop appearing in corridors, when the catering staff cancel the evening meal without notice, when the environmental systems shift into a steady low hum that means every department is running on auxiliary conservation, you understand that something has gone very wrong somewhere in the galaxy, and that the people who know exactly what it is have decided you do not need to know. I sat on the edge of my bunk with my translation pad in my lap and my clearance card on the desk beside me. Junior Xenolinguist clearance opens about 30% of the Council's archive. Most of it is boring. Conference records, translation variance logs, diplomatic correspondence that has been summarized and filed and will never be read by anyone again. I had used maybe 5% of what my clearance allowed in the 2 years since I had been posted here, because the rest of it had never seemed relevant. It seemed relevant now. I picked up the clearance card. I thought about what Vrethkon had said. Not the part about the unmade. The part about Earth. The part about the record. The part where he had said none. I opened the archive. The file was not hidden. It was just filed under a category that no one with junior clearance would normally think to look in, historical incident documentation, cross-species contact, Category 7. Category 7 means sensitive but not classified at my level, accessible, just not advertised. I found it in 11 minutes. I had the feeling it would have taken me 11 seconds if I had known to look. The file was called the Human Contact Index. It was 460 pages long. I started at the beginning. The first entry was dated 63 years ago, when Earth had only been a registered galactic observer for about a decade and had not yet been granted full council membership. A species called the Veth, extinct now, which I would come to understand by the end of that night, had experienced a catastrophic outbreak of a pathogen that moved faster than any treatment protocol the Council's medical corps could implement. 3 Council medical teams had been deployed. All 3 had followed standard containment procedures. The pathogen had continued to spread. A human doctor named Carl Bishop, serving as a junior medical observer with no authority to alter the treatment plan, had looked at the data for about 6 hours and then sent a message to the lead council physician that said, in its entirety, "I think we are approaching this the wrong way. The pathogen is not trying to survive. It is trying to replicate as fast as possible before the host dies. If we stop trying to kill it and instead accelerate the host's immune response, we might outpace it. I know this is not standard protocol. I am happy to be wrong. But I think we should try." The lead council physician had refused. The protocol was the protocol. Carl Bishop had then, and this was written in the driest possible archive language, which somehow made it more striking, independently acquired materials from the station medical bay, modified the treatment formulation without authorization, and administered the modified compound to 17 patients in the isolation ward before council medical staff became aware of the deviation. Of those 17 patients, 16 survived. The pathogen in their systems died within 40 hours. The council had formally reprimanded Carl Bishop for violating medical protocol. The Veth Medical Board had given him their highest civilian honor. The notation at the bottom of the entry read, "Modified protocol adopted as standard treatment. Outbreak contained. Total lives saved, estimated 400,000. 400,000 lives." From one man who looked at an impossible problem and decided that impossible was not a satisfying answer. I kept reading. Entry 12. 51 years ago. A territorial conflict between two species called the Cradle Nations had been ongoing for 30 years. The council had declared a formal negotiated settlement impossible after 11 failed mediation attempts. The file used that word specifically, impossible. The conflict had been categorized as a long-term managed situation, which in council language meant, "We have given up but we have not said so publicly." A human diplomat named Helen Marsh had been assigned to the region as a trade liaison, not a peace mediator, because the council had stopped sending peace mediators. Helen Marsh had, within her first month, ignored her trade liaison mandate, requested a meeting with both heads of government, been refused by both, shown up at the first one's office anyway, been escorted out by security, come back the following morning, been escorted out again, come back the third morning with breakfast, and on that third morning, the head of government had apparently laughed, and let her in. 6 weeks later, both leaders had signed a preliminary framework. The conflict that had been declared impossible to resolve ended in 5 months. The council's internal note on the incident read, "Diplomat Marsh's methods were irregular and frequently in violation of established mediation protocol. She was asked on 3 occasions to cease her unofficial approaches and declined each time. The outcome, while positive, raises concerns about the precedent set by unsanctioned diplomatic engagement." I stared at that sentence for a long time. The outcome, while positive. They had watched a 30-year war end in 5 months, and their official record led with the paperwork concerns. I read for 4 hours. Entry after entry. Situations that had been declared stable, impossible, unsolvable, or too dangerous to approach, and in each one, somewhere in the middle, a human had shown up and simply refused to agree with that assessment. Not because they were smarter than the council's analysts. Not because they had better technology or more resources. But because they seemed to operate with a fundamental inability to accept a ceiling on what was possible. A human engineer who rebuilt a failing atmospheric processor on a dying colony using tools designed for a completely different purpose, because the correct tools were 6 weeks away and he decided 6 weeks was too long. A human pilot who flew a diplomatic envoy through a debris field that every navigation model said was unsurvivable, because the envoy needed to arrive and the debris field was in the way. A human child, 12 years old, listed in the file as a civilian evacuee, who, during a catastrophic station failure, remembered something she had read once about emergency pressure systems and told an adult, who told an engineer, who was able to use that information to save the primary corridor and the 300 people inside it. Over and over. Ordinary people. No special powers. No dramatic heroics. Just humans looking at the word impossible and saying, "Let me look at this again." And then, near the end of the file, I found the section that made me stop completely. It was titled, Council Assessment, Human Psychological Profile, for Internal Diplomatic Guidance. I read it slowly. It said, human beings appear to lack the cognitive framework that most advanced species develop in response to sufficient civilizational experience, specifically, the ability to categorize certain problems as genuinely beyond resolution and adjust expectations accordingly. Where most species learn, over time, to distinguish between problems that can be solved and problems that cannot, humans appear to treat this distinction as provisional at best and insulting at worst. This characteristic, while frequently disruptive to established protocol, has produced outcomes in 7 documented cases that council projections assessed as statistically near impossible. We do not currently have a satisfactory explanation for this pattern. We have, however, observed one consistent factor: humans appear to perform better under conditions that other species find paralyzing. The greater the declared impossibility of a task, the more intensely human subjects tend to engage with it. Working hypothesis: the word impossible functions, in human psychology, less as a factual assessment and more as a challenge. I set down my pad. Outside my small window, the stars were the same as always. Cold and far and indifferent. Somewhere out past the rim, the unmade was moving through the dark, taking apart star systems the way a person might take apart a clock, methodically, without malice, without purpose anyone had been able to identify. 17 ships from the combined fleet. 40 hours. Nothing left. And the council, with all its ancient wisdom and its centuries of collective experience, had looked at the problem and quietly opened a file they had been keeping for 60 years, and asked themselves whether they needed to make a phone call. I thought about Carl Bishop and his unauthorized compound. I thought about Helen Marsh and her breakfast. I thought about a 12-year-old girl who remembered something she had read. I thought about the fact that Vrethkon had said none when asked how many times human involvement had made things worse. Then I thought about the way he had said it. Not with relief. Not with confidence. With the careful tone of a man who understood, very clearly, that a force which had never made things worse could still make things very, very different. I closed the file. I put my clearance card back on the desk. I lay down on my bunk and looked at the ceiling and did not sleep at all. They found me at 7 in the morning. I had not moved from my bunk. I had spent the hours between 4 and 7 doing what I apparently do when faced with large, unmanageable thoughts. I made lists. Lists of every fact I had read. Lists of the patterns I had noticed. Lists of questions I did not have answers to. My notepad was full of them. Neat, ordered, useless lists that gave my hand something to do while my mind sat with the weight of what I had learned. The knock at my door was not polite. It was the kind of knock that does not wait for a response. The door slid open before I could stand up. 2 Velhari security officers filled the doorway. They are not physically threatening in the way that, say, a Mashari guard would be. They do not have that kind of bulk, but they have a very particular quality of stillness that communicates, without any ambiguity, that you do not have a choice about what happens next. Yara Osei, the first one said. Not a question. Yes, I said. Elder Vrethkon requests your presence in the primary chamber. I looked at the clock on my wall. 7:04. Now, I said. Now, she confirmed. I had enough time to put on a clean jacket. That was all. The corridors were quieter than I had ever seen them. The station usually hummed with movement at this hour, translation staff heading to morning briefings, catering teams with carts, junior diplomats moving between departments with the busy, slightly anxious energy of people who always have somewhere to be. Today there was almost no one. The people I did see were walking fast, heads down, with the particular posture of individuals who do not want to make eye contact because they are afraid that eye contact might require them to answer questions. The primary chamber looked different in the morning amber light. Smaller, somehow. Or maybe it was just that the 12 delegation platforms were occupied by people who looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Vrethkon was standing at the central floor, not on his platform. That was unusual enough that I noticed it immediately. He looked at me when I entered, and I had the strange experience of being assessed by someone 4 times my age, from a civilization 10 times older than mine, with all 4 of his hands clasped in front of him. You were in the observation alcove yesterday, he said. There was no point in denying it. Yes, I said. You heard everything. Yes. He studied me for a moment. Then he said, we took a vote this morning. 8 in favor of contacting Earth. 4 opposed. Those 4 are concerned about loss of council authority over whatever follows. Those 8 are more concerned about the 14 months, he paused. None of our senior diplomatic staff are willing to carry the message. It is politically complicated for a council representative to be seen making this request. It implies a failure of council capability that no senior figure is prepared to acknowledge officially. I began to understand where this was going. But you, he continued, are not a senior figure. I looked at him. I translate catering menus, I said. You also hold xenolinguistic certification in 6 council languages, a working comprehension of 3 more, and a valid communication access code that reaches Earth's Defense Secretariat directly. He said it as though he had memorized my file. I suspected he had. And you are human. They will receive this call differently from you than from any of us. The room was very quiet. 12 species, watching me. I felt the weight of it the way you feel a change in air pressure, not dramatic, just suddenly present. I thought about Carl Bishop. I thought about Helen Marsh. I thought about the file I had read all night, 460 pages of ordinary humans who had looked at impossible situations and just not accepted them. I thought about Vrethkon saying none. I thought about the unmade, somewhere out in the dark, methodically working its way inward. What am I authorized to tell them? I said. Vrethkon's posture shifted, so slightly that only someone who had spent years studying alien body language would catch it. It was relief. Genuine, exhausted relief. Tell them there is a threat at the outer rim. Tell them it has destroyed everything we have sent against it. Tell them the rate of advance and the projected timeline. And tell them, he paused again, and in that pause I caught something I had not expected from the most powerful voice in the Galactic Council. Something that sounded almost like humility. Tell them we are asking for their help. I took the comms device from the aide who stepped forward to hand it to me. It was small and warm in my hand, which I found strange. A device this important should feel heavier than this. I keyed in the access code. I had memorized it during my first week of posting, the way you memorize emergency exits, not because you expect to use it, but because it felt irresponsible not to. The channel opened. There was a brief processing tone, a click, and then a voice. It was a woman's voice. Measured. Not rushed. The kind of voice that belonged to someone who had learned long ago that urgency and panic were not the same thing, and that only one of them was useful. United Earth Nations, Defense Secretariat. This is General Adiz Nwosu. Go ahead. I opened my mouth. I had prepared something careful and diplomatic, built on everything I had read the night before, framed in the kind of language that I thought would land well with a military officer who did not know me. What I said instead was, General Nwosu, my name is Yara Osei. I am a xenolinguist stationed at the Galactic Council primary hub. I am calling because the Council has asked me to contact you about something at the Outer Rim. Something that has been destroying everything sent against it and is currently moving inward. We need help, and the Council did not know any other way to say that. A beat of silence. Then General Nwosu said, we already know about the unmade. The chamber went completely still. I heard my own voice, slightly strange, you already know. We have been watching the rim go dark for 6 months, she said. Her tone had not changed. It was not smug. It was not satisfied. It was simply factual, in the way that a doctor reading a chart is factual. We noticed the pattern about 3 months before your outer fleet made first contact with it. We have had a research team on it since then. I looked up at Vrethkon. His 4 arms were all motionless. The Sur delegates behind him had gone very still. Delegate Oren of the Mashari was staring at me with the expression of someone who has just been told that the thing they were afraid of has been happening longer than they thought. The Council had been terrified of what Earth might do if brought into this crisis. They had watched humanity from a careful distance for 63 years, cataloging every unpredictable move, every protocol deviation, every impossible outcome. They had built an entire classified file around the idea that humans were a force to be managed carefully, approached with caution, engaged only as a last resort. And in all of that watching, they had apparently forgotten to notice that we were watching back. What took you so long to call? General Nwosu said. There was no accusation in it. Just the question. I had no answer that would reflect well on anyone in the room. We were working through internal processes, I said carefully. Understood. A brief pause. Tell your council this, we don't need a briefing, we don't need approval, and we don't need a ceremony. We need Sector 7 cleared of council vessels within the next 12 hours. After that, keep all non-Earth ships at minimum 2 light minutes from the contact zone. The research team has a plan, and the plan does not work if there is interference. I turned to look at Vrethkon. He had heard every word. His expression was not readable in any body language framework I had ever studied. It was something entirely new. The council will arrange it, I said into the device. Good, General Nwosu said. And Yara, you said your name was Yara? Yes. You did well making this call, a short pause. We'll handle it from here. The channel closed. I stood in the center of the primary chamber with the comms device in my hand, and the 12 delegations of the Galactic Council looking at me, and the slowly dawning realization settling over the room like a new kind of weather. They had been afraid of us for 60 years. And the whole time, we had simply been paying attention. Vrethkon's voice, when it came, was very quiet. How long have they known? I looked at him. 6 months, I said. At least. He stood very still for a long moment. Then he said, to no one in particular, clear Sector 7. The next 72 hours were the longest of my life, and I spent most of them sitting in a chair. That is the thing about waiting that no story ever quite captures. The waiting is not dramatic. It does not have a soundtrack. It is just time, moving at its normal speed, while somewhere out in the dark, something enormous is happening that you have no control over and no visibility into. You sit. You drink cold things. You watch screens that show you very little. You notice that the people around you are afraid in ways they are trying very hard not to show, and you try to decide whether your job is to reflect that fear back at them or to be something steadier. I chose steadier. Mostly because I did not have the energy for anything else. The council had cleared Sector 7 within 9 hours of my call. I watched the vessel withdrawal on the tracking display in the secondary observation room, where I had been given a temporary access pass and a fold-out chair and a very clear unofficial understanding that I was to stay in that room and be available and not go anywhere. The council ships moved out with the careful, deliberate speed of institutions accustomed to doing things in the correct order. By the time the 12-hour window closed, the zone was empty except for long-range sensor buoys that the council had asked permission to leave in place and that General Nwosu had approved, with the note, passive sensors only, no active pings. Then we waited. The first human ships arrived at the edge of the tracking display 4 hours after the zone cleared. I was watching when they appeared, and my first reaction was not what I expected. I had grown up with images of Earth's defense fleet. Everyone who worked in galactic affairs had some familiarity with the official documentation, but those were official images, posed and formal and sanitized for diplomatic purposes. What appeared on the display was something different. They were not arranged in a formation. Not in any formation I recognized from any tactical manual I had studied. The council's senior navigation analyst, a Mashari named Grund who had been standing behind me reviewing the same display, made a low sound that translated loosely as, "That is not a combat configuration." "What is it?" I asked. "I do not know," he said. This seemed to bother him considerably. The Sur delegate who had come to stand near us said something in Sur that my earpiece translated as, "They look like they are thinking." I watched the human ships on the display. There were 23 of them, ranging in size from large to very large, and they were moving in a pattern that was, Grund was right, not tactical in any conventional sense. They were spreading out, slowly, across a wide area of space, each ship maintaining a precise distance from the others. It looked less like a fleet preparing to engage something and more like a group of people arranging themselves to get the best possible view of a problem before deciding what to do about it. The unmade registered their arrival within 2 hours. I know this because the sensor buoys picked up a change in the unmade's electromagnetic signature, a shift in frequency that the Council's analysts had learned to associate with the entity's awareness of new inputs in its environment. The display flagged it automatically. Vrethkon, who had been standing in the doorway of the observation room for the past 3 hours without saying anything to anyone, straightened slightly. "It knows they are there," he said. "Yes," I said. The unmade changed course. Not away from the human ships. Toward them. This produced a sound in the observation room that I can only describe as collective breath being held. Vrethkon's 4 hands tightened. Grun stepped forward toward the display, his eyes fixed on the tracking feed. The sewer delegate made a very quiet sound. On the display, the human ships did not scatter. They did not retreat. They adjusted their spread, slightly, smoothly, the way a group of people might shift their positions to face something approaching from a new angle, and held. They are not moving away, Vrethkon said. His voice was not quite steady. No, I said. The comms channel I had been given was on a low open frequency, not a direct line to General Nwosu, but a broadcast channel that the Earth fleet had agreed to keep open so the Council could monitor audio. It had been quiet for hours. Now it crackled. It was not General Nwosu's voice. It was someone younger, calm, with the particular flat effect of a person reading out data in real time. Unmade inbound, matching projection. General Nwosu, approaching optimal comms range in approximately 40 minutes. General Nwosu's voice, from somewhere else on the same channel, confirmed. Hold position. I want the relay active in 30. Confirmed, General. Silence again. Vrethkon turned to me. They are going to attempt communication. It sounds like it, I said. We attempted communication, he said. And in his voice was something that was not quite frustration, not quite wonder, somewhere between the two. 14 times. It did not respond. I thought about what I had read in the archive. The doctor who found the treatment everyone else said was impossible. The diplomat who showed up 3 mornings in a row with breakfast. Maybe they are going to try something different, I said. Vrethkon looked at me for a long moment. They always try something different, he said. It did not sound like a complaint. It sounded like a confession. The next 11 hours were unlike anything I had experienced before and am unlikely to experience again. At the 30-minute mark, the Earth fleet opened a direct communications channel to the Unmade. I heard it happen, a shift in the broadcast audio, a kind of harmonic pattern that the Unmade was known to use in its own transmissions, reflected back at it. The Council's signal analysts went very quiet and began working very fast. For the first 2 hours, there was no response from the Unmade side of the channel. The human ships held their positions. The Unmade continued its approach, but its movement had changed, slower, or perhaps more precise. The analysts flagged it as an alteration in primary drive output, which in the Unmade's case meant something that none of them could definitively categorize. Vrethkon left the doorway and came into the observation room properly for the first time. He stood beside me at the display and watched the tracking feed with the concentrated attention of someone who has been waiting a very long time for something and is not entirely sure they want it to arrive. At the 2-hour and 14-minute mark, the Unmade responded. I heard it as a burst of harmonic data through the audio channel, layered, dense, not language in any form I had studied but clearly structured, clearly intentional. The human fleet's signal team absorbed it and, within 11 minutes, reflected something back. Different harmonics. Adjusted. Like someone who does not speak your language but is trying to work out the grammar in real time. They are building a shared syntax, the Council's lead signal analyst said, in a voice that sounded like he was reporting something he had never expected to report. From nothing. In real time. They are constructing a communication framework on the fly. Is that possible? Delegate Oren said from the doorway. He had come in without my noticing, and behind him were 2 more delegates, drawn by the sounds of something extraordinary happening. Apparently, the analyst said. He had the tone of a man updating his understanding of the word possible in real time. The exchange continued. Back and forth. The harmonics shifted and changed, became more complex, began to carry something that the analysts cautiously described as semantic weight, meaning, possibly. Not translatable yet, but structured in a way that implied intention rather than just data. At the 6-hour mark, Vrethkon's aide leaned in and murmured something to him. Vrethkon's expression changed. He looked at me. They are arguing, he said quietly. I straightened. Arguing. Our analysts believe the exchange has shifted from introductory framework to debate. The Unmade is transmitting what the team is characterizing as refusal patterns. The human signal team is responding with what they are characterizing as counterarguments. He paused. Our 14 communication attempts lasted an average of 4 minutes before the Unmade disengaged. This has been going on for 6 hours. I looked at the display. The unmade had stopped its forward movement entirely. It was, as far as the sensors could determine, completely stationary. It stopped, I said. Yes, Vrethkon said. Approximately 3 hours ago. And there it was. The thing the Council had never managed in 14 attempts, across 7 different linguistic and signal frameworks, with combined resources that dwarfed anything Earth's fleet could put together. They had not stopped the unmade's advance by overpowering it. They had not found a tactical solution. They had simply started a conversation. And then refused to let it end. At one point, around hour 8, General Nwosu's voice came clearly over the broadcast channel, not to her team, but what sounded like a direct message to the unmade itself, transmitted through the shared syntax framework. I understand you believe this process is necessary. I am asking you to help me understand why. If the reason is sound, I will tell you so. If it is not, I will tell you that too. But I need to understand it before I can answer you honestly. And I think honest answers are what this conversation requires. A long silence. Then the unmade's harmonic response, layered, long, complex. General Nwosu's signal team worked for 20 minutes. Then she heard their summary and said, "All right. Then let me tell you what I think is wrong with that." And they kept going. I looked around the observation room. At some point in the last few hours it had filled up, delegates, analysts, aides, staff who had found reasons to be in the corridor nearby and had gradually been admitted. No one had left. Vrethkon was still beside me. His 4 hands were loose at his sides now, not clasped, not raised. He looked like a man watching something he had been told was impossible, which it clearly was, and thinking about what that meant for all the other things he had been told. At the 9-hour mark, Delegate Oren said very quietly, "She is winning." No one argued. At the 11-hour mark, the unmade's harmonic output changed again. The analysts flagged it, and the lead analyst turned from his display and said, in a voice stripped of everything except the bare fact, "The unmade has accepted a framework for continued dialogue. It has paused its advance as a condition of that dialogue. It has agreed to listen." The room was so quiet I could hear the environmental system cycling. Then General Nwosu's voice came over the broadcast channel, calm and clear, "Council Liaison, are you still on this frequency?" I leaned toward the communications panel. "Yes, General. I am here." "Good. I'll need a formal council channel for the next phase. We have a working agreement in principle, but the terms will require council ratification. Can you arrange that?" I looked at Vrethkon. He looked at me. "Yes," I said into the channel. "We can arrange that." "Good work," General Nwosu said. It was directed at her team, I was certain. But it came through the open broadcast, and in the observation room full of 12 species and their representatives, everyone heard it. Vrethkon stood very still for a moment. Then he said to me, without looking away from the display, "Tell me, Yara Osei. Is this normal? For your people?" I thought about it honestly. "Not exactly," I said. "But it is not surprising either." He was quiet for a while after that. Outside the display window, in the dark of Sector 7, the unmade sat still for the first time in its recorded existence. And somewhere out there in the middle of it, General Adiz Nwosu was probably making notes. 3 weeks after the Sector 7 agreement was signed, I was still on the station. I had expected to be reassigned. My contract was for translation work, and the emergency protocols that had kept me on restricted movement had long since lifted. I had filed a formal note to my department head asking about my status twice, and received twice the same response, pending review. Which, in council language, meant, "We are not sure what to do with you yet." I was not unhappy about this. I had a fold-out chair and a temporary access pass and the strange, unasked for privilege of having been in the room when something historic happened. There are worse fates for a junior xenolinguist. The formal agreement, what the Council's press team had taken to calling the Sector 7 framework, had taken 9 days to negotiate fully. The broad terms that General Nwosu had secured in those 11 hours of direct exchange became the foundation, but the Council's diplomatic corps had spent the remaining days working through every clause and subclause with the careful exhaustion of institutions built for exactly this kind of thing. The unmade had remained stationary throughout, as agreed. A territory had been designated at the outer dark, a region of space far from any inhabited system, with resources sufficient for the unmade's purposes, and boundaries that the Council's mapping teams had spent an embarrassing number of hours trying to define in terms that made sense for an entity that did not think about space the way anyone else did. The unmade, as part of the framework, had been formally recognized as a sovereign entity. This had been the most contentious part. For delegations had objected strenuously. Vrethkon had ended the debate, in a session that I had heard about secondhand, by saying, "It has been operating as a sovereign entity regardless of our recognition. The question is not what we call it. The question is whether we want a relationship with it or not." They had taken the vote. 10 in favor. 2 abstentions. No oppositions on record. The 2 delegations that had been most vocal simply chose not to vote rather than officially oppose something they had run out of arguments against. The agreement had been signed. The unmade had moved to its designated territory. The rim systems that had gone dark were beginning, slowly, the long process of assessment, finding out what remained, what could be rebuilt, what was simply gone. That would take years. Possibly decades. But the advance had stopped, and in a calculation that Vrethkon had once framed very simply as 14 months, stopped was everything. Earth's formal diplomatic role in all of this had been minimized in the public record. This was by mutual agreement. General Nwosu had apparently requested it. "We don't need the credit," she had said to me, on one of the 3 calls we had conducted since Sector 7. "We need the outcome." Those are different things. I had found this both admirable and slightly frustrating, since it meant that the Council's public communications were presenting the framework as primarily a Council achievement, which struck me as generous to the point of revisionism. But it was not my call to make. On the 22nd day after the signing, Vrethkon came to find me. He did not send an aide. He came himself, to the secondary common area where I had taken to spending my evenings when I was not working, because the window there had a good view of the outer reaches of the station's sensor range, and I had developed a habit, in these weeks, of looking out at the dark for no particular reason. He sat down across from me. Not in the way that a superior sits with a subordinate. In the way that a person sits with someone when they want to talk, and they have not quite worked out how to start. I waited. I had learned, over 2 years of working with the Velhari, that they find direct questions intrusive. You give them the space and they come to the point in their own way. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I have been thinking about what the record does not capture." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "The Human Contact Index," he said. 460 pages. 63 years of documented incidents. Outcomes, protocols, analysis, recommendations. He paused. It records everything that happened. It does not record how it felt, for those of us who watched. I was quiet, because something in his tone told me that this was going somewhere real. When Carl Bishop administered that compound to those 17 patients, Vrethkon said, "I was not yet elder. I was a junior adjudicator in the Medical Oversight Board. I read the report 3 days after it happened. And I remember very clearly, I remember thinking, he did not know it would work. He had a theory, and some data, and something that was not certainty. And he chose to act anyway. Not because he was reckless. Because the alternative, waiting, following protocol, doing things the right way while more people died, was not something he could accept." I listened. "The Council has spent 63 years being careful," Vrethkon said. "We have extensive protocols for every situation we have encountered. We have archives. We have precedent. We have the accumulated wisdom of 12 species across hundreds of years of collective governance." He looked at me. "And when something genuinely new arrived, something our protocols could not address, we spent 6 months watching the rim go dark while we worked through internal processes." I thought about what General Nwosu had said. "What took you so long to call?" "The thing that frightens us about humans," Vrethkon said, "is not your unpredictability. Your unpredictability is, we can account for that, in a way. What frightens us is the clarity. Every time a human looks at a problem we have declared impossible, and then solves it, they do not just solve the problem. They show us that we had accepted the problem. That we had filed it under impossible and moved on, and that underneath that filing was not a genuine assessment of impossibility but a kind of exhaustion. Or caution. Or the accumulated weight of doing things the right way for so long that the right way has become the only way we can see. He was quiet for a moment. You make us see what we stopped looking at, he said finally. And that is harder to sit with than the problems themselves. I thought about this for a long time before I answered. I thought about Carl Bishop and Helen Marsh and the 12-year-old girl with the pressure system and General Adiz Nwosu sitting in the middle of Sector 7, arguing with something ancient and enormous and genuinely dangerous, for 11 hours, because the alternative was unacceptable. I thought about what it was like to grow up on Earth. The particular quality of a species that had survived every impossible thing it had ever faced, not because it was the strongest or the smartest, but because it had never, quite, learned to stop. I don't think we do it on purpose, I said. Vrethkon's expression was, as always, not fully translatable. But I thought I caught something close to a quiet acknowledgement in it. No, he said. I do not think you do. Which is perhaps the point. Outside the window, the dark was the same as it always was. Distant stars. The faint, barely visible edge of the Sector 7 boundary, quiet now. The station around us breathed its steady mechanical breath. I thought about the 14 months that were not going to happen. About the worlds at the rim that were dark and damaged but would have the time now to find their way back. About a problem that every calculation had said was unsolvable, that had been solved not by a fleet or a weapon or a protocol, but by a general who decided that even an ancient, expanding, synthetic entity deserved to be argued with honestly before anyone gave up on it. What happens now? I said. Vrethkon looked at the window. Now we rebuild what was lost at the rim. We establish the framework for ongoing dialogue with the unmade. We file an extremely long series of reports, he paused. And we update the Human Contact Index. What does the new entry say? He was quiet for a moment. Then, we have not finished writing it yet. It is difficult to summarize, he looked at me. Perhaps you would be willing to help. I looked at him. I thought I was only here for the catering menus. For the first time since I had met Vrethkon, something moved in his expression that looked, in no language I had ever studied but in the one I had grown up with, very much like a smile. Yes, he said. That is clearly no longer accurate. Outside, the stars were unchanged. Cold and far and indifferent, the way they always are, the way they always will be. But somewhere out past the rim, past the quiet new border of the Sector 7 territory, in a stretch of dark that had been designed by 12 species and one ancient intelligence as a place where something new could exist without threatening everything else, something was settled that had not been settled before. 14 months had become 0. And I, Yara Osei, junior xenolinguist, accidental witness, had a new entry to help write. I picked up my notepad. I started from the beginning.